Welcome to the Satluj TV News Special. Now, we've regularly highlighted in our many articles the serious issues that the Sikh community around the world are facing today. And those who've raised themselves up publicly, campaigning on behalf of the community and even daring to call out India's behaviour, have found themselves faced with threats and intimidation sourced from India. Anyone publicly campaigning for Khalistan in any meaningful way, as an example, find themselves as a target. We only need to see recent news stories from the US and Canada to discover threats have turned into direct and even fatal action. And so in our series of interviews, we're talking to people directly involved in the community, and particularly with activism, people with the courage and determination not to be intimidated. And we want to gauge their opinions and experiences. So my guest today is Harjeet Singh. Harjeet is a third-generation veteran of the Indian Armed Forces. And after serving in the Indian Air Force for 6 years, he's built a successful career in the corporate world, holding senior leadership roles at technology companies like Amazon, Samsung and Chewy. And from his base in Seattle with his family, Harjeet is an active campaigner across social media and other platforms. And with a deep understanding of political and structural issues affecting Southeast Asia, particularly the Indian subcontinent, Harjeet is particularly passionate about advocating for self-determination. His overall aim is to use education and awareness to address the socio-political problems of the subcontinent. Harjeet, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Angus. Thank you. Glad to be here.
Now, Harjeet, let me start with a big question and a simple question. India, as you know, is closely allied with what's called the I2RC countries. That's India, Iran, Russia, China, and particularly, of course, Moscow. From a Western and maybe even a global perspective, can we see India as an ally?
Yeah, that's the trillion-dollar question. As on today, we cannot see India as an ally. I think it will be a huge mistake if the national security establishment in US and all Five Eyes countries expect to see India as an ally. And there are multiple reasons for it. You have an ally, you can have friends, or you can have allies with whom you share values. And in geopolitics, there are two things which are important. Do you have shared values or do you have shared interests? You can have relationships with countries like Saudi Arabia where you have shared interest, but the interest can change over a period of time. Today, we have shared interest with Saudi Arabia. Fine, we are working together. Tomorrow, we don't share interest with Saudi Arabia. We will probably be enemies. But with countries where we have shared values, then the relationships are way more durable, long lasting, and deeper. Like, all Five Eyes countries, we share values which are based upon principles of human rights, on freedom of expression, on basic freedom of speech, etc., etc. Now the question is, with India, do we share interests or do we share values? I think that is the main question. I think in today's world, it should be amply clear to everybody, we do not share values with the Indian regime. And I'm kind of quoting the Indian regime and not using the term Indian people, because we have to learn to differentiate between these two things. So with the Indian system of governance, the Indian constitutional makeup, and the type of regime it pumps out will never have shared values with Western countries. So it will never be our ally. So now we have to understand why that is so. Quote unquote, India is a democracy. And I think that is where, the biggest flaw is. It's a convenient lie we tell ourselves that India is a democracy. So if anybody votes, does that make somebody a democracy? Even in China, people vote. People don't know that. If you are in China, you do vote. Even in Russia, they vote. They elect every time President Putin. But is Putin a democracy, or is Russia a democracy? No. Even in Pakistan, people vote. Even in all these authoritarian countries, people vote. So what makes a country, I won't use the word democratic, but something a country which values the life and freedom of its citizens is way more deeper than that. And the problem with India has been from the starting itself, from 1947, when British left the continent. What British had done was they had taken, India is not one nation. India is a subcontinent or a continent with 29 to 32 different nations. They put all of that under one regime, centralized all the power, and the decision making in the hands of few people sitting on top. And when they left, they never reformed the system while going. They just transferred power. So if you look at the Indian partition doc, or when the British left, they call it transfer of power. They transferred the power to a very select casteist elite among two countries, India and Pakistan. And till today, India functions like that. That is why in India, you have police stations where every police station has an authorized torture cell. You have India, which has never signed the, the United Nations treaties on not to do human torture. You talk about the human rights record. If you list all the countries based upon data, India will be the worst offender right on top, along with countries like North Korea, some of the African countries like Idi Amin. And India and the constitutional makeup of India is such that all these nations are disenfranchised. They have like it. Imagine you are in Europe. Let me give you an example because you are in UK. Let us say that today we say the British people cannot write their own laws. You cannot write your own. You cannot decide what your judicial system will be. You don't have the ability to decide your own even traffic laws. Somebody sitting in Germany in some United Nation kind of organization where all the people from all these countries will gather together and they will be having decision-making power based upon their population, and they will decide what will be the judicial system of UK, what kind of, and then they will not only decide. Your judges will not be your judges. They will appoint your judges. They will appoint your police officers. They will appoint your military officers. Will that be a system you would like to live in, Angus?
Yeah, exactly.
Anybody. So, but that is the system that has been left by Britishers when they left. And I think they left because they had to leave in hurry. And they had to kind of leave with minimum life loss for the people, the British, the people who were there. So they did the transfer of power, they left, but now that is the system which has been working in India for almost 75 years, which is, I would call it a tyrannical system, wherein people on the ground are totally disenfranchised. They don't control where their taxes go. They don't decide what their laws will be. And this is not only 6, this is, all the nations, Nagaland, the Tamilians in South, the Kashmiris, the tribals, because all the power is totally centralized in the hand of few casteist elite, which come from the region, what we call the cow belt. And then what they convenient. So basically, India is Hitler's dream for Europe come true. So that is what the reality is. So in that world, if that is how centralized India is running, wherein people on the ground do not have the decision-making power, or they do not have the right to write their own laws, which is the basics of democracy. The basic principle of democracy is that people should write their own laws, or their representatives should write their own laws. That principle is not followed under the Indian Constitution. So now, due to that, what we have is basically an authoritarian regime masked as a democracy. So India is not the biggest democracy in the world. It is the biggest authoritarian regime in the world. So if we start looking at India as an authoritarian regime, then we can have a sensible, practical policy and engagement with India.
Do you think everything, sorry to interrupt, do you think everything changed? If you wind the clock back 10 years, do you think India was a different country then than it is now?
Yeah, so this is where a bit of nuance comes in. If you wind the clock 10 years back, you will see people who are probably younger than me, younger than you, they would probably have felt that, oh, India was this friendly country where all these nice people come in, they contribute to us productively, there's a democracy. But that was a very temporary phase. To understand that phase, we have to look at from 1947. From 1947 till 1992, people who are of my age and your age, we know how sordidly India was in the USSR bucket. India was, quote unquote, the enemy of the West. The country which has voted the most against United States in United Nations is actually India, if you pull up the data. And by 1991, India had almost kicked out every single business, Western business, all the big companies, and it was totally running almost like a semi-communist country. But when USSR disintegrated by 1991, everybody thought India will disintegrate. But by a luck, I would say a stroke of luck, India had a very, I would say, again a Sikh who kind of saved India, Manmohan Singh. By stroke of luck, they had this guy who came in and who followed a very sensible policy, what they call liberalization, which was basically nothing but decentralization. And it was not just him. What happened in 1991 was, for the very first time in India, in the center, there was no national party which came into power on its own. There were regional parties from these 32 nations which formed almost a 29-party coalition. So de facto, India decentralized because now every single nation had a say in the power decision making. And that process of coalition governments continued till 2014. Even the Prime Minister Manmohan Singh's two governments, which from 2004 to 2014, they were led by Congress and National Party, but they were actually coalition governments. He had to rely on the support of these small regional parties. And now when the decision making is decentralized, obviously the states had more power. It was not still a fully federal structure, but it was still like a glimpse, I would say, like a hope that, okay, we can now progress. And that decentralization, and I was born in 80, so I was around 12, 13 years old when India started somewhat decentralizing through liberalization. The whole, the outlook of India changed. We had we became West friendly. We had investments coming from US. We had jobs getting created. And that process lasted, as I said, till 2013 and 14, till we had coalition governments. But because of the structural flaw, allows a national party to come in who can then, rally 30% of Indian continent's vote and can gain 100% of the power. BJP came on picture, another national party like Congress. Congress was the single largest party from 47 till 92. Now its alter ego, the BJP, came in, and they basically have all the power, and they said, oh no, we are going to run everything. We are going to fix everything by brute force. And that decentralized, or the federal structure, kind of vanished overnight. And now we see the after effects of it. The very first thing that happened, once you had all the power in the hand of four people, that they basically started kicking out Western businesses. So between 2014 till 2017, the amount of control I call it the comeback of the license Raj. They basically had these foolhardy policies that, oh, why do we need General Motors here? Why do we need, Ford making cars? We have our Mahindra, we have our Tata. So let's put 250% duty on any car import, kick them out. So then these 2 or 3 nationalist, car makers, they can make all the cars. So basically they don't understand the economy, but they basically are nationalist in nature. So they basically want all the business to consolidate in the hands of some domestic entrepreneurs. And so those foolhardy policies kicked out, basically ruined Indian economy. And by 2017, the Indian economy, in my books, has not grown. I think it had started shrinking. The numbers that they have been sharing are not, on GDP, nobody trusts them. And we can go into those details. So the attraction that India is this huge market, and it is a huge market, 1.5 billion people, they will at least need something to eat, something to, wear. But the fact is that if they are living in such a controlled environment, then they will never have economic progress. They will never become the market that we expect them to become. So that hope was kicked aside. Then on top of that, the political power, let us say the people who had the power, they also want to homogenize India. So they want to make India one country. Their dream is not to have a multicultural state like America.
Yeah, well, can I jump in there, Haji? Sorry, because I think there is an argument which struck me about Narendra Modi, and for all his faults, one thing that struck me a few years ago, I used to work in the Middle East and I had a lot of Indian colleagues and they all spoke to each other in English. And I said, why don't you speak in your own language? And they said, well, because we have 42 or something different languages in India. And it suddenly hit me just how diverse India was. I didn't know this. I imagine most Western people have no idea how diverse India is. So, but then I thought, well, Narendra Modi, he has this what I thought was a laudable plan, strategy to unite all this diversity under the one flag, try and bring in a single language so that he can then emerge on the world stage. We are a united nation, speaking one language with one aligned mindset. In theory, that's a great idea. That is the best way to approach the world. In practice, you're saying it's a very bad idea.
Yeah. How would you like if somebody comes and tells you tomorrow you're going to speak German?
Exactly. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. Yeah, no, totally. Well, and actually, sorry.
The argument they will make is, we will be united as the European. We are all iron nation. That was the exact idea of Hitler.
Yeah, and if I may just jump in there, and just to throw in a very relevant example to use your metaphor of Germany. Of course, the UK, we left the European Union a few years ago, a perfect demonstration of democracy. And one of the reasons that we voted to leave the European Union was because a lack of democracy, because our laws, our rules, our judges, much of our legal framework, our legal decisions was created by people in Brussels. And despite we allegedly had our own parliament with its own lawmaking abilities, in reality, those lawmaking or the lawmaking still was subjugated to a superior lawmaking structure within the European Union in Brussels. So that is why the UK took the democratic option. We had a referendum and we left the European Union. So I totally understand that view. Yes, in that respect, if you feel that you are not represented, if your voices are not heard and you have no stake in lawmaking, absolutely you have every right to leave that structure.
No, but it gets even more sinister than that. Like, the European Union is a voluntary coming together of nations who say we want to benefit by having same laws, standardized duties, standardized commerce, one market. It's a voluntary coming together. You can walk out. It's up to you. But what is India is, we have to first realize it was not a voluntary union of nations. It was a forced union. Every single nation was conquered and subjugated with a fight until death before they were made forcibly part of this quote unquote British Empire. And once that happened, when British left, ideally they should have said, we conquered 29 countries, let us make these 29 countries free. So they would have decolonized. That would have been a real decolonization. But they didn't. Look, if you are the one who created something, you don't want to destroy it when leaving, right? So you would say, okay, I want to keep my baby. So they didn't want to decolonize. So what they did was, let us appoint this elite which will substitute for us. So the Indian subcontinent never decolonized. Just the fact that British stopped governing doesn't mean that India was decolonized. Now, instead of a British guy sitting on top, you had this casteist elite who was probably way worse than the Britisher, because he is not neutral. Okay, so they are sitting on top on a colonized nation. Now, the problem with the way how they kind of this idea of India, I call it an evil idea because it is very similar to Hitler's idea. And that is why all the ideologues of Indian nationalism, they admire Hitler. So Hitler's idea was unity in political action because we have racial solidarity. We are all Aryans, some Viking tribes, and we are at the end same. Let us have unity. Now, the Indian nationalism, it says, because they cannot say we are racially similar, because like I, as a Punjabi, don't even look like a Northeastern guy, or even you can look at us and say, oh no, we are different races. We can't be same. So they said we want unity in political action because of civilizational solidarity. So they say we are one civilization. So which civilization? In India, in the continent, there's no one civilization. You have Indus Valley civilization, you have Narmada Valley civilization, you have Northeastern civilization, you have, Kaveri River civilization. These were huge, because their languages, culture, ethnicities are different. So they came up with an idea, and this was a Karamchand Gandhi's idea. People call him Mahatma Gandhi. I don't call him, but he came up with an idea that we are one civilization, quote unquote, Indian civilization. But the word Indian is also not Indian. It came from you guys. So which civilization? So they say, okay, we have some epic like Mahabharata. Now that epic is not even dated. It is mythology. It is not history. Everybody knows that. But they said, no, it is history. There was something called Bharat stretching from Kashmir right till Sri Lanka. All mythology. It is not based on it. Hitler's claim were at least based on practical history, but these guys claim were like, we were some Indian civilization, and now, so we will some this Bharat civilization, so we are one now. So what they are saying is that somebody sitting a Pathan in northwestern Pakistan is from the same civilization as a Tamilian from Tamil Nadu. Is that even factually true? It's a lie. It's a black lie. People who know subcontinent. So now when you make that lie, why Karamchand Gandhi made that lie was because if we are one civilization, then when I am writing the constitution, then I can just count, I can do like a adult franchise, one man, one vote. And I can take the majority view and run with it. But if I say we are, let us say 10 civilizations, then civilizations don't do power sharing based upon count of heads. Like in United Nations, Maldives, 500,000 people has one vote. UK has one vote. US and India, 1.5 billion has one vote. Then you sit as equals. And then in European Union, you don't decide in that, that, okay, just because, Croatia has a couple of less people, let's keep their vote like 1/10, right? So that is not how you do relationships when you are independent nations. So because they didn't want to do that, they didn't want to go through like, if we acknowledge this reality that we are 10 nations, then if we want to have unity, then everybody's say will have to be factored in. They continued with that lie that we are, one civilization. And now that has created a problem that when the Constitution of India was written, there was nobody from Northeast. There were 2 Sikhs. Those 2 Sikhs refused to sign the Constitution. The makeup of the Constitution Assembly was 75% of them came from one tribe called Brahmins, which is only 3% of the entire population of India. So it was a constitution itself was a fraud. So and then they centralized all the power so that we can win 30% of the vote somehow, and those from the large states which have more population, and then we can control everything. Now it is not in that they know that they are sitting there illegitimately with that power. Now they have to suppress all these minorities who are, on the edges. So that is why the problem with Sikhs, because Sikhs don't agree to the idea of Indian nationalism. We call it an evil idea. We don't believe in homogenization. So when Karamchand Gandhi gave this idea, we are one civilization, which was a lie. We are not one civilization. And because Pathan in the Northwest has nothing to do with, civilizationally with Tamilian in the South. A Pathan in the Northwest has more commonality with an Iranian. A Punjabi like me will have more commonality with in our culture, our ethnicity with an Iranian, with a Afghanistani guy or with a Kazakh than with somebody from Tamil Nadu. Nothing wrong in that. But the fact is that they people who got the power when British left, they refused to acknowledge this reality, and they told everybody a lie. And the reason why they told that lie is important. Why they had to tell this lie was because they did not want all these nations to sit as equal on a table. They didn't want to share power. If you agree that Nagaland is a nation in itself, Bengal is a nation in itself, Tamil Nadu is a nation in itself, then all of them have to sit together as equals on a table, not based upon the count of heads.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned the Constitution, because one thing that struck me recently was the story of Jammu and Kashmir, where they were afforded all sorts of rights and autonomy under the Indian Constitution. Of course, Narendra Modi came along and just ripped up that section, said no, took direct control in 2019, I think it was, flooded the area with 500,000 Indian troops, and now basically controls Kashmir with an iron fist. That to me is a pretty direct and brutal taking of control. Would you agree?
Yeah. So while it is true that that he on paper took out the Article 370 or the autonomy, but the fact is that that state never had true autonomy. Like it had what we call de jure autonomy, but not de facto autonomy. Because the Indian Constitution is such that, if you read, like there is a, and I always give an example, people should read the fundamental rights. They say, oh, our Constitution has fundamental rights. Okay. So I'll tell you why. So in India, there is a law called UAPA, and it is applicable everywhere. Doesn't matter whether it is you are Jammu, Kashmir, wherever. In that, you can be picked up by a police officer, put into jail for 2 years without being produced in a court, without you being told what the charges against you are, and you can be tortured, etc., whatever. Then the real beauty is, if you are picked up and you are said you are a terrorist, now the onus is on you to prove that you are not a terrorist. The onus is not on the police officer to prove on what basis he picked the person up. The onus is on the accused to now prove his innocence to the somebody who has picked him up. And this kind of a reversal of burden of proof, does that happen anywhere? I don't think even it happens in North Korea.
Yeah, I mean, there are several examples of this, and of course I've covered the story of Amir Pal Singh as a prime example of this, who is now residing in legal limbo in prison on the other side of India from the Punjab. He's on the east side, deliberately so. He's removed from his family, his whole network. His poor wife has to travel on a weekly basis all the way across India at vast expense, is allowed to visit him for a short period, then has to travel back to the Punjab. So it's a very cynical ploy. We also have a guy, a UK citizen, Jagtar Singh Johal, who was imprisoned, I think 6 years ago, still in prison, still awaiting charges. No evidence has been presented. It's an appalling. It's laughing in the face of
present any evidence. Actually, they can easily tell the judge he has to prove that he is innocent. So that is the actual law. Now the question is, how can you frame such a law? You can frame such a law because the Indian Constitution allows you to frame such a law. And you say, why does the Indian Constitution have fundamental rights? They'll say, yes, we have fundamental rights. But then you go and read those fundamental rights in the Constitution. It is Article 19, right to freedom of speech, freedom of religion. There are 40 words telling you have these rights. And there are 400 words how the government can take away that right from you. So basically that article is that you have no freedom of religion, you have no freedom of life, you have no freedom of speech. Okay, that is what that whole article is about.
Yeah, and it's a very cynical tactic, this, and I've seen it increasingly used in recent years in India, but not just in India. It's of course across the diaspora, and I see through UK, Canada, US, several very high-profile campaigners, particularly Khalistani campaigners, have been labelled terrorists by India. And of course, India has demanded repatriation of these people back to India so they can face justice. Unfortunately, I know, for example, in Canada, I think the Canadian government received at least 12 requests regarding 12 separate campaigners saying they are terrorists. We demand that they be deported back to India. And well done to Canada, who investigated it, as they should, through due process, said, no, they are not terrorists. They are legitimate, genuine political campaigners. We have a right to free speech. We have a process of law. We run by the rule of law. So, no, it's not going to happen. And it's a very cynical ploy, this, of India. So they are trying to, well, we'll talk about transnational repression, but this in itself, this is transnational repression at a legal level, where they, by virtue of calling them terrorists, they are leaning on Western nations, who, of course, we are increasingly bringing in our own anti-terrorism laws. So Narendra Modi is very cynically saying, right, well, you don't like terrorists, these people are terrorists, hand them over, please. Now, fortunately, in the name of Western democracy, our countries have said, no, we have this freedom of speech. It's a very cynical ploy.
Yeah, that's why it is very dangerous. But that's why I say now today, you're right, and I'll take that example. So what is happening is, why these countries are at a loggerhead, US and Canada and India, and by default British and US as well. It's the same story for all of us. So what is happening is, India is saying this guy is a terrorist. And okay, so Canada is going to say, okay, fine, we'll rapidly free the terrorist. Please take him, but give us some evidence so we can go to the court and kind of say we are sending him. Oh, he's a terrorist. Okay, yeah, but like, what is the evidence? He's a terrorist. But what is the evidence? And Indian government said, no, he's a terrorist. Because the Indian law does not require any evidence to label anybody a terrorist. The Indian law is sufficient enough. Like anybody, a police officer can just say, I don't like Angus Scott's, spectacle, so I'm going to label him a terrorist. That's what the law is. So they're saying, no, our law says he's a terrorist, so he's a terrorist. So you have to hand him over, and they say, fine, but at least there has to be some basic evidence before we pack a guy up. He's our citizen. And then they say, no, like, we are saying he's a terrorist, so just believe us. And that is the fundamental problem. That's where I say we have no shared values. And that is the clash that is happening. That, you know, we then when Trudeau stood up, he was basically trying to coach Modi by saying we have a rule of law. When we say rule of law, you and I, we say it means due process. Like in India, the concept of due process is alien, because in India, the due process means you speak anything against the government has the right to kill you. And it does not matter whether it is extra constitutional, because even like it is, their police stations themselves have authorized torture cells. Can you imagine that? Like, you go into a police station, if you get hired as a police chap, the first thing they will teach you is how to torture. And every single, it's not an exception, it is the rule. So the problem is actually not with India. The problem is with our vision. They like to tell them, Indian regime wants to use this garb of democracy to take advantage for themselves, in the sense that they want to keep repressing, they want to keep homogenizing the continent, and they want West not to ask them questions. And I think we need to, the moment we stop telling ourselves that India is a democracy, then everything is simple to deal with. The moment we acknowledge that India is an authoritarian regime, then there is no problem. Then we can deal with them. Then we can understand, then we can understand that, okay, if we are going to do a trade deal with them, it is in our interest, but we are not kind of, we are looking aside human rights issue, but this is the level which we will go to. Like we deal with Saudi Arabia, we deal with North Korea. But like the problem happens when we want to lie to ourselves. They tell us a lie, which is convenient for us to believe in. And that creates all this problem. Yeah.
Do you think, I mean, because it's all very well looking from the outside in, it's very easy for us to say it is an authoritarian regime and it is no longer a democracy, if indeed it ever was. But do you not think the people of India, who essentially are not to blame for this, just the ordinary person in the street in India, of course they are subjected to a barrage of propaganda, of nationalist propaganda. It is, as we know, it is one of the least free. It is the country with one of the least free presses in the world. I think it's 161st out of 180 in the World Free Press Index, only just above North Korea, which is just it's shameful. So of course the man in the street in India, and of course the woman in the street, are forming their opinions based on what they see in the newspapers, on television, etc. And of course that narrative from the Indian state, which is controlling the media outlets, is one story, and this is a story that you will only know and you will therefore believe. How on earth can you change that? Because once you can change the mindset of the people of India, they then wake up to the fact of what is going on around them. And you talked about Hitler. Of course, the problem in Germany was some of the German people knew what was going on in the 1930s, but they were too afraid to speak out. But a lot of people were just totally caught up in the fervour, the indoctrination, in the same way, for example, the Hindutva army are. They've seen so much propaganda that they are totally focused, they are zealots about India as one nationalist nation, one Hindu nation. How on earth can you tackle this? How can you persuade the person in the street in India that this is not the case? Something is going wrong here.
Yeah. No, this is a great question. Now we are getting to the crux of it. A couple of days back, somebody asked me a question. A Canadian friend, I will not name him, he's a high official in the government. He said, Harjeet, why is the Indian government afraid of Sikhs? And I said, this is $1 trillion question. Because the Sikhs are the only community or the only nation which have the ability to tackle head on this thing called Indian nationalism. And it can spread as it could be an infectious spread of freedom, of democracy through the subcontinent. So it is imperative for anybody who is ruling from Delhi, if they want to homogenize India, they have to handle the Sikhs. They are only 1.5% of the population, but they are the only people who are willing to noisily, with whatever means, fight it out with the Indian government that, oh, we are not okay with, a centralized setup. And So how to convince it? It's very difficult. Go back to what happened in Hitler's time. When Hitler took over other countries, there was good portion of those countries who were actually sympathizers of Hitler. Like when they took over Dutch, Holland, like there was many Holland people who were kind of taken in by the the propaganda that we have to have this Aryan unity. Same way in India, there are majority of the minorities, especially the linguistic and religious minorities, they don't buy into this argument, but many of them don't have the wherewithal to fight it. They know the might of the Indian, like how brutal the Indian regime can be. So they remain quiet. And they say, okay, someday something will happen. And honestly, they all look up to the Sikhs. If the farmer agitation you had seen 2 years back, when the Sikh farmers were protesting, there were farmers coming all over from India, like from Andhra Pradesh, from Northeast, and meeting the Sikh farmers saying, please do something. We are just looking up to you, that you can, if you win, then we will feel that we have won. So same way, the way to reform the subcontinent, the decolonize the subcontinent, make sure that everybody, the people of India achieve their full potential. That is my aim. The only way you can do that is by supporting the Sikhs basically break away from this setup. If they break away from this setup and they form a state which is based upon, values and principles on which our Western democracies are based upon, which I think will be true, because the Sikh, if you have interacted with Sikhs, you will see that these values, what we call Western democratic values, are actually part of the religion itself. So there's I have no doubt that if a Sikh majority area is made kind of decolonized from this setup, they will create an example. This whole edifice will kind of break down. You will see the Tamilians kind of, setting up something for themselves, and then there'll be good friendly competition between these nations. They will not be they'll not be fighting with each other. No way. Like a Sikh has no interest, or Punjabi has no interest in going and taking over the land of Rajasthani. They know we are different nations. The problem happens when some group stands up in the middle. Like Spaniards have no interest to go and come and take over UK. Do you have any interest in going and taking over the land of Germans? No. You just want to live your life, do trade and commerce, and that is a similar state there. If you take away that centralized setup, and the way to kind of break that is, and it is not just India, it is also Pakistan. I call that India is the big empire and Pakistan is the mini empire. They are not nations, they are empires. And so the only way I would say if we don't do this, if the Western nations don't do this, if the Western nations don't decolonize the subcontinent, that they imagine these are two empires run by, I call them half-educated, totally disconnected elite, who have nuclear bombs with them. And they will keep oppressing their people. They will keep killing their own people till the time there is not a big civil war or big disaster, or they can even throw nuclear bombs at each other. God knows what can happen. So it is imperative, it is in our interest to go and decolonize the subcontinent.
Yeah, one thing.
Decolonize, yeah.
Yeah, one thing I've noticed in my own research, and one thing that's particularly inspired me, is probably the right word, is the Sikh history, going back to the empire. And also the British involvement, and it's almost been a statement of pride from the British side that yes, let's forget all the evils of colonialism. But one thing, one I think positive thing for our generation that came out of all this was during when the East India Company took over India. The last part of India to fall was the Sikh Empire, was the Sikhs, because they are a fabulous warrior race, and their history is fabulous. It's very inspiring, and the bravery and the heroism displayed by the warriors during those times so impressed the British that, of course, then the British invited Sikhs to join the British Army in the same way that the Gurkhas were done from Nepal. And the Sikhs have fought in the British Army with incredible distinction. They are some of the most highly decorated soldiers in the British Army, and it is a huge source of pride for both the British to have them in the army, but also for the Sikhs within the British Army. So I think inherent, as what you've really been alluding to, inherent for some reason, inherent in the Sikh gene, there is this this demand for self-determination, for independence, for sovereignty, all these things, which I guess is behind this drive for sovereignty. And I did actually argue in one of my earlier news stories that it would be in Narendra Modi's interest just to carve away Khalistan, because logically, Khalistan, Punjab, has been a deep thorn in India's side since partition. It has caused no end of problems for the Indian government. By granting Khalistan, which is at the end of the day, in terms of surface area, is just a small part up in the northwest, immediately the Indian government removes one of its biggest political, military, everything problem in one go. So why on earth doesn't it do it?
Yeah. So if I was the one in Narendra Modi's chair, okay, if I was the one whose agenda was to homogenize, okay, so the way I would look at the problem is that, okay, there is this middle part of India where majority of the population is, we call it cow belt. It is more or less homogenized to a certain extent. Okay, so I would like to make on that gain, and I say, okay, South I can probably keep with myself. So it will be in my interest. You are very right. If I want to create this rest of India as Hindu India, quote unquote, some kind of a civilizational India, though I still think it is a flawed project. We can still manage it to a certain extent if you have most of the people kind of buy into it. I would rather, let the Sikhs who have been a thorn, like kind of have a state which will actually benefit, in the sense that the Sikhs if you see, like they don't have any inborn hatred either for Muslims or Hindus. And they are open, like, okay, if there's a Sikh state between Pakistan and India, it will be actually friendly with both India and Pakistan. And it will open up the trade. It will have porous borders with India as well as Pakistan. And it will open up the trade right from Bengal, right up to Europe, the old Silk route that we had, which was the major route. And it is not only in the interest of India, it is in the interest of China, it is in the interest of Russia. I don't call Russia, I don't like Russians because they are another empire in themselves, but it's in the interest of Chinese, it's in the interest of Western nations to actually open up this subcontinent somehow for trade, so that the full potential of that market can be realized. And the only way to do that is to solve this religious tribal problem, is to create a Sikh majority or a Sikh run state between these two countries. And you will see, if that state is success, I have no doubt it will be hugely successful, because it was successful in the past. And even if there's I can tell you today, even there's a public signaling by, let us say, the UK or by US that we are in favor of such a state, you will see that people in Haryana, the neighboring state of Punjab, people in Pakistani Punjab, they will start demanding, we want to be part of this Sikh state.
Well, do you think
their historical,
yeah, because of course historically Punjab did include a large part of the northeast of Pakistan. Is there an argument to include that into Khalistan?
I won't say to start off with. I would say the inclusion could be in the sense that if the Sikh Punjab is created, so there is the Pakistani Punjab, West Punjab, then there's the Eastern Punjab, which today is 3 states: Punjab, Haryana, Himachal. And if just the Sikh portion of Punjab becomes like an independent state, it will have, as I said, porous kind of friendly relationship between these two. So once the people movement is free, then it is unified in that sense. What does it mean? Like, it doesn't mean centralized power, but if people can cross freely, if the goods can move freely, I call it unification. Like in today, if you are in Germany, you take a car, you can go to Holland in like 3 hours. That's a unification. Yes, we have different laws, different systems, and that is the type of unification that will happen. Today, it is all an armed boundary with nuclear weapons fighting at each other. That will vanish overnight.
Can I pick up?
Yeah.
Can I pick up on just one point you mentioned earlier, which I think is a very, very important point, is that at a community level, Hindus, Sikhs, all the various parts of society all mix perfectly normally, perfectly friendly. There is no division. There's no aggression, there's no nastiness. So at a community level, it has been demonstrated that these divisions really don't exist. But this contrasts significantly with the wave of propaganda that we're seeing online from, essentially from the Indian state, who are creating this very divisive environment, trying to turn the each individual part of the community against each other, which is a very terrible thing to do. Are you seeing more of that, or do you think still at a community level people are just getting on with their lives quite happily amongst each other?
Yeah, no. So it has seeped down now to the community level. First, I'll tell you, if you don't have Delhi and Islamabad, then the nations that are in the subcontinent have no fight with each other. The religions that are in there have no fight with each other. The issue is that there is now political power centralized in a handful of people here who can give favors to somebody, who can punish somebody depending upon what they want to do. And the people on the ground are totally disenfranchised. So how are they going to? And then the people in the center, if you want to win power in India as a national party, you come from a state. What is the issue you will wake up? You will not wake up a local issue. Because on a local issue, you cannot win power in the center. You have to create national issues. And those national issues have to be they have to be based upon emotion. Suppose you want to become the, they cannot be based upon just logic. What is the logic? Like they'll have to sell something like, oh, Hindus, you be afraid of Sikhs. They are going to murder all Hindus. It will always be Sikhs versus Hindus or Hindus versus Muslims. Otherwise, what is the other national issue? Every issue is a local issue.
Well, it upsets me because we get a lot of comments on some of our videos from Hindus saying, why are you being so divisive? I have lots of Sikh friends. We all get on perfectly well. They're missing the point. Is it's very easy coming from a Hindu perspective to saying, why are you divisive? It's actually, we're not the ones, or let's say I'm talking on behalf of the Sikhs, but it's not the Sikhs that are creating the division. It's the Sikhs are being marginalized, and it's the Hindus who are being turned against the Sikhs by artificial arguments, by things that cannot really be justified, because as these people themselves admit, that everybody gets on perfectly well. There is no division. The division, this divisive nature, is coming from central government, from central India. And it's just people like us that are passing on this message to say, do you realize what's going on here? That's the key. That's the real problem. That's the root of what is going wrong.
Yeah. The people who come and make this argument, if you look at them, they will generally be educated, middle class, Hindi speaking India. This is the casteist elite which gains the power in Delhi. So they will be the biggest champions of Indian nationalism. Okay. Oh, we want the strong center, everything is centralized. So they'll make arguments like, okay, why? Oh, so we have one language. Okay, so why one language? So we can interact with each other. Punjabi can interact with the Tamil. Okay, so for 5,000 years, how were we interacting? So why do we suddenly need one Hindi? We have English. We are okay. We are okay to use English. English is a global language. It should be our choice what language we want to interact with. And we want to learn it so we can be part of it. Now you're saying, no, you have to learn Hindi. But Hindi is your language. And you want us to learn Hindi, and you want us to forget how many languages can you learn? Everybody has to learn English in today's world. Everybody, if you make them learn Hindi, what happens to their mother language? It will become the third language. And now it becomes the third language. What happens is you will lose your culture. A culture is neither in the clothes that you wear. It is neither in the food that you eat. It's not in the music. The culture is in the language. Because today, suppose you are Italian. You are born Italian, let us say blue-blooded Italian. But I don't teach you Italian language. I give you Italian food, I give you Italian clothes, I give you everything, but I don't let you learn a single word of Italian. When you grow up, will you be Italian? No, if you learn English, you'll be English. So the culture is actually in the language. So and that is what they want to attack, because they want all these different cultures to forget their native culture and adopt an artificially created culture, which is under construction, which we call Indian culture. In reality, there is no such thing called Indian culture. There is no such thing called Indian language. There is no such thing called Indian value system. There is no such thing called Indian cuisine. You have Punjabi language, you have Punjabi food, you have Punjabi cuisine, you have Bengali language, Bengali cuisine, Bengali food. So is there something called a European culture? Is there something called a European language? So the Indian word is and India is way more diverse than Europe. One state in India is way more diverse than Europe.
Yeah, it's interesting because these all these arguments totally mirror the arguments that the UK had about the European Union, saying how can you homogenize something so diverse with 27 different countries, 27 different cultures, 27 different languages? How on earth can you unite that under every possible umbrella? It's one thing, it's extremely difficult to do, and secondly, do people really want that? The British didn't, as they voted accordingly.
Yeah. So actually, if you read, you look at the states in Europe, they are nation states. One state is one nation. A nation is common language, common culture, common value system. So nation state makes sense in Europe. India could have nation states, but then you could have one Punjab nation, Bengal nation, Tamil nation. If you want to make a multicultural state, then you have to take the model of United States. United States is the only multicultural state where the system allows. And that is why, European nations have a problem today with immigration, because their constitution and system is not geared to handle a multicultural state. They were formed as nation states. So the German was supposed to be a German state. So it was supposed to kind of factor in the, and you guys are dealing with that problem today. But like the India knew from day one, we are a multicultural state, should be multicultural state, but whosoever got the power they want. And actually, if you read some of the reports, like when Britishers were there is every 10 years they used to look at, reform the constitution, give more powers to the natives. So every 10 years, 1909 was the Morlemento reforms. 1919 was the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms. Then the 29 was Simon Commission. They used to use the word that we are building United States of India. So their vision was to build a federal India with different provinces acting as independent nations under one banner. And that model can work in the subcontinent. But then you need people who want that model. The problem is that power got transferred to people who hated that model. They don't want it, and they have, over a period of 75 years, using that power that they have now created this, Frankenstein of Indian nationalism, which they are brainwashing more and more people. And this is a path towards self-destruction. And if it was a non-nuclear world, we could have turned our eyes away and let a billion people die. But it's not, the problem will not remain there. Today, Indians are all over. There are so many Indians in UK. There's so many Indians sitting in the White House of Biden. And they are now being brainwashed by this Indian nationalistic propaganda by the Indian government. And the Indian government has turned them into double agents for themselves. They are being used to pump in disinformation in our societies here and kind of, create problems which don't exist. You see this event that happened in Australia, wherein a Hindu mandir was defaced by some Hindu boys. And the police investigation told. So what the Indian government is trying to do is trying to now rake up communal tensions, even there, to use it for their political benefit.
Yeah, so it's this divisive politics. Again, there is a deliberate policy of division.
Yeah, and they have the label of democracy. And so we are complacent and we get all these immigrants from there. But we also have to seriously think about, look, we want to help India, but at what cost? We are letting in all these immigrants from India today who are actually bought under this idea of Indian nationalism. And what is the idea of Indian nationalism? We have to understand. And you have to read, and I have actually posted a tweet wherein I have a RNAW officer who actually lays it out very clearly what their thought process is. So the Indian nationalism idea is that India is a civilization, quote unquote, and it's a mythical Mahabharata civilization. So if India is a civilization, there are some other civilizations. Which are those? In their mindset, it is Christian civilization, Muslim civilization, Chinese civilization, maybe a Russian civilization, quote unquote. And these civilizations have to be in perennial conflict. We have to fight and win over these civilizations. So an Indian nationalist mind, a Western country is not a friend. It's an enemy. Pretty much like when you talk to somebody who is brainwashed by this idea of having one Islamic conquest of the entire world. It is same thought process. And when they are, and people brainwashed into that ideology, when they are coming into our system, they don't look, when they emigrate to US, they don't look at US something to copy. They look at US something to be taken down. Because Indian civilization is supreme. Mahabharata was supreme. Our Varna system was supreme. And we are today bad because the Britishers came and they looted $45 trillion. God knows where they get this number from. But, so now it is our turn to get back. So when all these people with this mindset are coming, are they our friends? And they are taking British passport, they are taking Canadian passport, they are taking US passport. But are they really giving their allegiance to our flag? I don't think so. You ask them and they will tell you, no, my allegiance is to the Indian flag. So in a way, our freedoms the Western freedoms have been turned and weaponized against Western nations. Today, Biden is not able to, or Trudeau's country was attacked. Trudeau's citizen was killed by a foreign country. And Trudeau stood up in the parliament and he stood up in the parliament. And when you stand up in the parliament and you make a statement, you're basically saying we are at war. Ideally, all the Canadian MPs should have rallied behind the flag or underneath the flag. But Trudeau was isolated. And Trudeau had to fight an uphill battle. Why? Because Prime Minister of a hostile country has more influence in Trudeau's country than Trudeau himself. And where is he getting the influence from? He's getting the influence from the nationalist Indians that he has pumped into the system in Canada.
Which brings us, so I was going to say, which brings us full circle back to the original question right at the beginning of our discussion was, can we see India as an ally? I think the simple answer is no.
We have to see India as a threat.
Indeed.
And India is in my books, India is a bigger national security threat than Russia and China. And it's better that we wake up to that reality. We will wake up, but hope it is not too late.
Yeah. Harjeet, we've run out of time. We could talk all day, I'm sure, about this. And in fact, I guarantee we will have a follow-up video to discuss many more of these topics. In the meantime, Harjeet Singh, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Welcome. Thanks for joining us here on Satluj TV.
Thank you. It was great being here.
A pleasure. You've been watching Satluj TV News Special. I'm Angus Scott in London. We'll see you next time.